Your Honor, may I call to the stand my one and only witness?
Peace, family. Welcome to another episode of Underground Railroad Productions, UGR TV. Turtle Gang. Been seeing you for quite some time. I have never met somebody who has... you're one of the most adamant brothers I've seen on the scenes when it comes to telling what we call black people that they are indigenous to this country. There's a lot of misconceptions flowing around. I see you, when I was on Facebook, I seen you post a lot. I know you have a bloodline that you share that you can actually prove. You have history that you can actually prove. Tell the people that are totally fucking confused by all the talk going on in the black community about you're African, no you're Asian, no you're the real Indians, no you're this now. Fuck it, we came from everywhere. People like, I don't know what to think anymore. Turtle Gang, just tell the people, clear up some confusion for them, because I know you're real adamant about that.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say Welagunta Walking, peace, Wanishi to all my indigenous relatives on Turtle Island. Basically, when you deal with indigenous culture, everybody on this planet is a descendant of a tribe. Whether you know it or not, you descend from a tribe. Now, all these tribes have their history. A lot of us have been written out of history, and it's called paper genocide. Laws were passed starting in 1700s, 1800s, but the final law that was passed was called the Racial Integrity Act, which was passed in 1924. This act changed it took your nationality away from you and reduced you to a racial category. So that would be Negro, colored, things of that nature. So a lot of us, when you look back on your the census reports, you're gonna find that a lot of your ancestors were documented as being colored. Now, when you understand that the original term for colored represented anyone who was indigenous, and what they would say Native American and black, right? But the point is, black is not a nationality. So when they deal with when they say black, they hide a nationality. A lot of people don't understand, or they don't realize that the actual slave trade started in the Americas and took people to Europe, right? So a lot of what we call slaves, or people who came here during the first arrival of slaves to the Americas, a lot of these people were indigenous people who were initially taken from here and brought back. Like the first colony established in New Jersey is called Middletown. Middletown sits on the Navesink River. The Navesink is the name of my tribe. It means those closest to the river, right? So a lot of the history that we have, you can really easily deal with who you truly were when you start decoding the history of the towns and the cities and the boroughs you grew up in. Your family was raised in. My family in particular, we from New Jersey. We're documented as one of the oldest three families that was on record as being here when the Europeans established their first colony, which was Middletown, which is on the northern bank of the Navesink River. The southern bank of the Navesink River is a town called Red Bank. That's where I'm from.
Pinebrook Cemetery in Tinton Falls, tucked amid subdivisions in the woods near an old Lenape burial ground, the resting place for generations of local African Americans who couldn't be buried in local white cemeteries.
A lot of these places that we know of as cities, right? I'll give you an example, New Orleans. New Orleans is a French military outpost, right? Where I'm from, Red Bank, Manhattan, places like this were indigenous cities. And when the Europeans came here, they just overlaid everything that we were already doing. I can show them proof of this because my great-great-grandfather was one of the individuals responsible for paving all the indigenous pathways. Fulton Street was already here. We was already doing trade on these places. Europeans came here and they just overlaid the roads. From the Navesink River, you would float your goods up to what we call Manhattan. Manhattan was a place of trade. That's why it was deemed the World Trade. That's why the World Trade Center was built here. Because Manhattan is always in a place where the nations came to trade. Nations as far as Europe, South America, North America, Canada, right? They tell you about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was native routes, native trade routes. The final destination was a place called Nova Scotia. Right? When you understand where Nova Scotia is, you understand that Nova Scotia means New Scotland, right? When you deal with Scotland, right? An example for a lot of y'all, because you like to watch movies, the last king of Scotland dealt with Uganda. The Ugandans, right, who established what we call Kemet, a lot of them were run out of that area, and they went up into places like Greece. They went up into places like Rome, and they were known as the Etruscans. They were known as the Iberians, right? Because they were being persecuted for their religious beliefs. So these same Coptics were run out of places like Kemet. They established Greece. They established Rome. They established Iberia. These are also the Jews that were in Iberia that were run out, that they like to tell you were white people, and they were not white people. These tribes were known as the Morini and the Mandubi. You can look these tribes up. These tribes fled all the way up into France and places like that, all the way over to the England, right? And eventually they came through Greenland, and they established their first homeland in the Americas in a place called Nova Scotia. Now, Nova Scotia means new dark lands. Kemet is what? The dark lands, right? No, Scotland is the dark land. Scot is come from the word scorch. Scorch, as in blackened, right? So now when you're dealing with the term Scot, Scot means dark. So when we talk about Anne Scott, who was the mother of King James, Scott is not a name, it's a title. See, a lot of the things we don't understand is that what we think of as surnames are just descriptive titles, meaning Europeans, when they named things or they designated things, it was either descriptive, locational, right, or functional. So you have names like Miller, right, because those families worked at mills. You have names like Taylor, because those families made clothing. You have people who are known as fishers, because when they encountered these people, they encountered them on the waters and they were fishing. So they call the people fishers. You have families named Rivers. Why? Because when they encountered these families when they came here, they named them according to their location place, right? So you have family names like Hill, right? Family names like my family, which is Rock, right? When you start to deal with the real understanding of languages, you understand that a lot of the people who, what we assume are surnames, are really descriptive terms given to the people. But when they steal your language and they steal your identity, what happens is you start to revert and you start to use different names, identities for yourself. One of the first names that we reverted to, right, and I'm speaking for those of us in Lenape-Hoking, which is all of New Jersey, the 5 boroughs, eastern Pennsylvania, and northern Delaware, all right? So all the people within that territory who lost their tribal identity started to refer to themselves as Moors.
Hey, Sio. I'm here at the request of Dr. Holloway, Chairman-in-Chief of the Sandhill Band of Indians, and his counsel, Ron Holloway. I worked extensively with the community then known as Moors in Cumberland County, New Jersey, to organize the county as a tribal entity. You may speak to Chief Mark Gould, who I encouraged to move back to New Jersey from Maryland to lead his community to later become known as the Nanaco Lenni Lenape Indians.
Because Moor is a general title that references seafaring indigenous nations, right? It doesn't mean Morocco. Somebody from Morocco is not a Moor, he's a Moroccan. Somebody from Mauritania is not a Moor, he's a Mauritanian. Moor is not a nationality, right? Moor come out of a function, it come out of an action. Who was the person when Columbus sailed here, who guided his ship? Pedro the Moor. Moor is a function, just like Taylor is a function, just like Smith is a function. But the Europeans, when they encountered the original Moors, right, they were all melanated people. So through association, Moor became dark. But it's not what it means. Connotatively, it means navigator. That's what it means. But you're going to deal with people who are going to tell you more means this and more means that, and I'm telling you, they are not educated on the concept. Now, I will break it down for you. There's a tribe called the Nanticoke Lenape Moors in southern Jersey, right? For a long period of time, after they passed laws which denied us the right to carry out our culture, and our culture was simply farming and hunting. All this other stuff y'all want to talk about, it's just the show. It's regalia, right? Our culture was hunting and farming. When they outlawed that because they wanted to control our food sources, when they outlawed marijuana and hemp because it provided over 1,000 remedies in terms of foods, medicines, things of that nature. When they outlawed all that, we were forced to start dealing with them on their terms. The term Moor is not complexion. It eventually meant that, but it meant seafaring nations. So seafaring nations would be any nation who is not landlocked and is on waters, right? So certain nations wouldn't be considered Moors because they landlocked. Their whole culture is not predicated on seafaring, right? So you would include people like Vikings and people like that as Moors. So we're dealing with ancient indigenous cultures that migrated via navigation of boats and ships. Now, we didn't need giant boats because if you're familiar with the Filipino islands, you know you can island hop in canoes. You can island hop from Europe to the Americas via Greenland and the islands that are in between that the map don't show you. So we're dealing with Christians, right? The early Christians, who are not the Christians that we sit up here and fight with, The early Christians were people from the land that we call Kemet. They're called the Coptics. Greek is not a language. Greeks speak Coptic, right? So when we say they spoke Greek, people don't know what they're talking about and they're misleading you. There's no such thing as Greek. These people were Coptics, right? These people were Africans who migrated into a different area. It's packed right now. You can't set up something with all these people here. You got to find a little bit of space for yourself so you can have your own space so you can thrive as a nation. So that's what nations was doing. So we have ancient nations that have ancient treaties, right? Those treaties were interrupted in what you call the Inquisition. The Inquisition started in a place called Denmark, right? Amongst white tribes. Why? Because those white tribes had treaties with the other tribes all over the planet. And these people are the people that you would eventually become known as Moors, because Moor means navigator. It don't got nothing to do with complexion. The reason why terms like tawny Moor were introduced is because the European associated all Moors with being dark, because the original people that he met navigating were dark. So the same way we associate hockey players with being white is the same way they associated Moors with being black, right? But as we taught the amalgamated Moors and people like that how to navigate, now you have something called tawny Moor to differentiate, because that means light-skinned navigator. See what I'm saying? Because they had to differentiate, because now this knowledge was being taught to different nations, right? So you got a lot of people talking about we not Moors, we not this. Moor is not a nationality. It's a general title for indigenous people who come from navigating nations, all right? Now,
It's a general title just like black.
just like black. Because when you say black, you don't know what nation you're talking about. Somebody asked me my nationality, I'm Lenni Lenape. That means the real people. We got a language, we got a river, we got everything. I'll take you to my burial grounds, everywhere. You're standing in my territory right now, right? If we went to Africa right now, everybody would bow down and kiss the ground and respect every deity in Kemet, in Africa, wherever you may be. But our people run around here and don't respect any of the indigenous histories, deities, or nothing. They wonder why we're in such a bad position, right? You're disrespecting your mothers, you're disrespecting your fathers, your uncles, put it this way. When we start dealing with genetics, right? You got 4 grandparents. When you double that, you got 8. So every generation you go back doubles, right? So when somebody tells you their great-grandmother was from Nigeria, what about the other 31 of your grandparents that produced you? Because every time you go back, you got to double your grandparents. So what I'm saying is we are a product of international trade. We are a product of many nations coming together, dealing with trade. When you deal with trade, you also trade genetics. That's a very heavy part of trade, because you have to renew your genetics. If you keep intermixing amongst yourself, we know what that produces, right? So you trade genetics with different people around the planet as well as goods. So this is why we appear the way we appear here in the Americas, because the Americas was the first melting pot. The first cooking pot was a turtle shell. Turn it upside down. This is Turtle Island. Gumbo, Louisiana. You understand? That's the culture of America, and that's the culture that drives the world. It's the combination of all cultures. Even in Kemet, Kemet would not have been a great civilization if it was just one group of people, because no new ideas can be brought in, nothing can happen. It'll just be a stagnant culture. You got many, and if people want to deny that, we can just talk about multiple symbols for the same deity, which shows that you're dealing with different people from different areas, but dealing with the same concept. And the same thing can be said over here. You know what I mean? You run around looking for Ma'at, go to a powwow, you'll see Ma'at walking around. She's not gonna be on the wall, living, breathing. You understand? My Ma'at is my clan mothers. You understand? Because if my clan mothers, my elders tell me no, it's a wrap. Because I want to maintain my respect within my family, within my tribe. You understand? I told you the slave trade started with Native Americans being brought to England. That's what I said. I never said that. You know what I'm saying? The Africans that eventually were brought here, you know what I mean? They were brought here because they couldn't enslave us anymore. You understand? Why? Because you can't enslave a man in his own home. You know what I mean? And I'm telling you right now, all these inventions, they give credit to African Americans. Ain't no African gonna come to the Americas and tell you when to plant your stuff. It's a science you gotta study. It ain't the same over there as it is here. You gotta know the land, right? So all these achievements that we ascribe to African Americans, these are achievements by Native Americans who had to take on an identity of being African American because they was hanging us. But you think they was hanging people because they was Africans. Africans just wanna go home. Nigga from here wanna take his shit over. That's a threat. You understand? So all these niggas you seen getting hung in the South, it ain't what you think. They hanging these people because they knew the routes. You understand? They hanging these people because they all had the potential to be Harriet Tubman. Because they all could lead these people in a path to get them away from these Europeans. You know what I'm saying? I can name countless tribes that relocated up into mountains because they didn't want to deal with these Europeans. You know what I'm saying? And those same tribes are still here, but we we call Negro, we call color, we call all these different things. And when we try and bring this information to a lot of our people who are black and proud, and I understand that. I understand what's the process that made us proud to be black, everything we came through. But the point of the matter is you all come from tribes. I don't care if you know your tribe or not, you descend from a tribe. And tribes are the only one that have legal jurisdiction over lands. See, the problem is our people don't rise above corporate law. Corporate law is the glass ceiling that you cannot rise above. When you rise above corporate law and understand what international law, which is based on treaty, right? When the police come through here and they snatch us all up, they're gonna snatch me with you. But when the remedy comes, my remedy is gonna be much different. Because they know who I am and they know they don't have jurisdiction over me via any of this false paperwork. You understand? So my thing is this: we looking for people, we looking for a way out, but all the people who are trying to provide a way out don't have jurisdiction over this land. We need to deal with the people who have the actual jurisdiction of this land, and we need to empower them. The same way the Keys were able to create a platform for themselves politically and things of that nature, we have to come together as a people. We have to rally behind the people who actually have the authority, or what's going to happen is the same thing that happened in Haiti. Now, for a lot of people to understand what happened in Haiti, when Haiti overthrew the French, all they did was step into the powers of position that the French held. They didn't go back to their indigenous culture or their indigenous way of life. So now what you have is, you have a second world government being overthrown. When I say second world government, I'm saying the second government on any land is corporate government. The first government is indigenous, or the tribal government, which signs the charters and the deeds, which allows the corporations to operate on your land. That's called the second world. The third world is somebody who's left out of the first and second world, meaning you're not a tribal government and you're not a corporate government. So when Haiti overthrew the corporate government that was instilled by France, and they didn't reinstate their indigenous government dealing with their clan mothers and their tribes and things of that nature, they fell into what you call a third world country. Now, these third world countries don't have any allies because they're not aligned with the indigenous tribes and they're not aligned with the corporations because they just overthrew one. So now what happens, you have Haiti in the situation that it's in now. Also, you have a situation like that with the Lakota out on the reservations. They third world countries because they signed away their indigenous rights, they agreed to go on reservations, and now that they don't have no remedy, right? Nobody is responsible for them. They've fallen into a situation of poverty, you know what I mean? And it's worse than any project in any hood you ever been to. And just one more thing I want to say. When we talk about reservations, you go to a reservation, you see poverty, you see churches, and you see liquor stores. When you go to any hood, you see poverty, you see churches, and you see liquor stores. So what make you think you're not on a reservation? Yeah. That's what's really going on here. And all these other people posturing, trying to push their religion. I ain't never said one word about my people's religion, because I don't have to, because that's personal, right? When I talk about my history, I'm not going to talk about the history of my religion. Talk about the history of my people and us having jurisdiction over these Europeans here, right? So ain't no foreign religion going to save you in our situations. That's personal. Keep it to yourself. What we have to deal with is who has the real power and jurisdiction. And it's not Kemet, right? It's not Nubia. It's none of these places here. The people who have jurisdiction are the tribes, and we need to deal with the tribes, whether you know your tribe or not. That's who you need to empower. The same way old people empower other old people and they control their votes, the same way they control their votes, we need to control our stuff dealing with the fact that we're indigenous people. But we also have to understand that just because you are melanated, don't think you're not a colonizer. Because if you hear from another land and you pushing another culture here, you colonizing. Now, when you come here and you respect the cultures that was here and you assist them, they'll assist you. And I'm telling you now, it's groups that have been at the UN for the past 2 weeks that I'm sure none of you know about. And they look just like me and you. And a lot of y'all would call them crazy because you say they trying to be something they not. But they sitting in the UN banging on the beast for real. You understand? And that's who we need to start dealing with. We need to start dealing with real movements that have real power and jurisdiction. I understand the street movements, we feel good about ourselves, we feel like we're doing something. But when we start dealing with real politics and really taking control of our cultures and our futures, we have to deal with the people who have jurisdiction over the land. We have to get behind them. So all I'm saying is the same way we come to these rallies, these events, this is just what a powwow look like. Same thing. We need to start dealing with them. We need to start dealing with those nations because they are represented as nations. And when the European came here, there was no such thing as an RBG nation. There's no treaties for the RBG. There's no treaty for none of these people, right? But there's treaties for the original tribes that was here. And every one of y'all got a piece of that in you. Whether your father was from Africa and your mother was from the Americas, you're still entitled to your mother's inheritance, right? So this is what we have to start dealing with. This is why they passed the one-drop rule. They passed the one-drop rule because you had our brothers and sisters who are so amalgamated in light skin, they can pass themselves off for white. But when they go home to their black mothers. And they feared that. You understand? So they had to create racial categories, and they had to stunt your development based on that racial category. So as long as we keep feeding into these racial categories, right, we playing their game. People need to find out their nationality, and no disrespect to the Moors, but Moorish Americans not a nationality. You know what I'm saying? And I love the Moors. I love how they build. I love the information they bring to the forefront. But let's deal with it. And I've dealt with Moors who admit to that. But let's just deal with it.
Saying what you said about the Moors and that not being a nationality, how do you feel about Noble Drew Ali and what he brought to this country?
Noble Drew Ali did what he was supposed to do. He woke people up. Because where did Noble Drew Ali establish the first Moorish Science Temple? Nah. First Moorish Science Temple was located in Newark, New Jersey. Noble Drew Ali do what you're supposed to do, because like I said before, when people fall out of their identities, they take on a general term, just like we call ourselves black. So when people fell out of their nationalities because they was being outlawed and you couldn't be that, or else your family would be separated, you understand? If you had a light-skinned child and a brown-skinned child, they would separate the children, right? So to avoid all that, you say, well, I'm not Cherokee, I'm not Choctaw, I'm not Lenape, I'm Negro. Because now you can stay in your territory, you can stay where you own land, where you owned your farms, but you are no longer a threat because the Indians, right, so-called Indians, had jurisdiction. So they got to remove you from who you are so they can raise them prices on you. It's all economics. Just type in Turtle Gang, all my stuff will come up. Check me out at Boom Bap Nation. We doing big things with this hip-hop movement, man. You know, and I'm always out here, I'm always in the background, I'm always lurking.
You can't fake this long, partner.